This is going to be a demonstration of how to do the 90-90 liftoff, specifically for internal rotation, which is going to be our back hip. The 90-90 position is going to be down here on the floor, and it just represents how we position our hips and our legs in space. So the 90-90 is going to focus on the front knee being in line with the hip, and then that back knee being in line with the hip. Traditionally, the knees are going to be bent at also a 90-degree angle. For internal rotation, we don't necessarily have to worry about too much of this front leg. So if you want to do what's called a collapse 90, where this foot is in front and touching the front of your leg, because that's more comfortable for you, by all means do that setup. In general, the goal of this is that we're trying to learn how to rotate the hip, so that way our ankle and foot start raising up off of the ground. So traditionally, you're going to have your hip forward with your chest looking forward. Your arms are going to be your kickstands. And we're, again, trying to lift the ankle off of the ground using the hip. When we're trying to lift this up, make sure that when it does lift, it's not because you had to lean forward and also shoot that hip forward, because that would be deemed a compensation. Ideally, that we're trying to find a position where we can do this separate of the rest of the body having to move. If you can't lift up your ankle, that's probably because you don't have enough room or strength inside of the hip. So if I start sitting back further into my hip and make that kickstand, and I try and lift up off of the ground, I'm still trying to internally rotate, but as you can see, the ankle is not moving. Once I start looking forward and lean forward just a little bit, you can now see that I start being able to gain a little bit of space. And this is because we're now no longer in what's called end range. So end range would be where I start to feel a stretch. And then the question is, can you actively get into that position under that stretch? To find more room in the hip, like I mentioned, you can start leaning more forward, and the more forward you become, you can see the higher up my ankle can get. So the more upright I become, the smaller the range of motion becomes. The other option is you can just simply lean off to the side, and this would also give you a similar feeling of getting just more leverage and space inside the hip to now get more range of motion. And the more upright I become, the smaller the range of motion is. So if I'm completely straight up and I try and lift up, if I lean over about 10 to 15 degrees, I now have created more ability and leverage inside the hip to try and get up off of the ground. So that is a demonstration and explanation of a 90-90, specifically trying to do a lift off into internal rotation.